r/Askreddit by Robotainment. People no longer bound by their non-disclosure agreements. What can you now disclose? Funny story. Moments after I was unceremoniously fired because my tech skills were found to be insufficient, the bosses who fired me demanded to know the whereabouts of a hugely important computer file I had worked on. I refused to help them. I even cited the exact language of the NDA I was compelled to sign. I'm prohibited from disclosing details of my employment with anyone, including past and current employees of the company, I expounded, adding, so ask someone who works here, because I don't. It was a great fuck you moment that I still cherish 5 years later, but now I think I can disclose the truth. I only hid behind the NDA language because I had no clue where to find their damn computer file point or even where to look. I suck with computers. Fired because my tech skills were found to be insufficient. I suck with computers. This checks out. The cake/cupcake shop I used to work for claimed everything was homemade, but used Pillsbury cake mix as a base. I read a thread, I think it was a confessions thread on Askreddit, where a woman who ran a super successful home bakery business was literally just using Pillsbury cake mix, and this is how I learned what Pillsbury was, as we don't have it in England. She had the odd hack or two, and was seriously good at decorating apparently, but she was essentially just using cake mix. She even talked about how she felt like a fraud, got nauseous about going to the grocery store, and hated the sight or taste of cake. As a lawyer, I viewed a lot of these and taught settlements. The most common use of the NDA is to keep the award amount quiet so everyone won't sue the company, hoping to get that sweet settlement money. Edit. Several people have me about their NDAs, and if they can talk about this or that. I'm not your lawyer. I don't give legal advice to non-clients. You shouldn't take legal advice from strangers on Reddit. But it's called a settlement because you settled the matter. Let it go. You got the hush money, now do the hush. I used to do data analysis of revenue management for some big companies. Many companies have no clue about their data or their revenue streams. I'm talking several $1 million of revenue disappearing in the pipeline and no one knowing what happened with it, or even caring really. There were multiple times I had to inform clients that we had huge gaps in their costs and we needed to find the missing numbers somewhere in order to make our final reports correct, and was met with the paraphrased reply, just sprinkle the missing costs over the existing one. We just want the final total to be correct. All the companies cared about if the amount of money they have at the end of the year is higher than at the beginning, and anything that happens in between is inconsequential. I objected at first to my bosses, saying that what we were doing was incorrect, but they said to just do as the client said. In the end, I got disillusioned, and whenever our clients came with requests that made no mathematical or logical sense, I'd just execute as requested, and let their analysts figure out later that the analysis they paid 6 figures for was basically nonsense. I didn't care, because I had documentation of all their requests and my objections, which were thoroughly ignored. I had a few cases where clients came back disgruntled several months down the line after some in-house analyst had done a deep dive of their data and came up with objections that I had pointed out months before. I'd usually dig up the relevant emails and clear my name. My choice of action was to tell them to pound sand, but my bosses always bent over backwards for clients, so we'd have to do the cleanup I anticipated. In the end, I learned most of our economy is held together by duct tape and wishful thinking. At most 10% of people working at big companies are competent and carry the bulk of the work, and rarely are the competent ones the ones in charge. Edit. I want to clarify something for everyone who's talking about embezzlement and people lining their pockets. I can assure you that in the data I was working on, this was very unlikely. The money streams I was analyzing went to other companies as costs, so if they had literally disappeared, someone would notice. This missing money was really just a case of utter incompetence. People just too lazy or stupid to properly keep track of what goes where. I'm sure that if we got all the data from partnering companies, we would eventually be able to track everything precisely. We were unfortunately limited to whatever data our clients provided, and we would rarely get data from other companies as they're quite privy about sharing it with third parties. This rant was not about corruption but rather incompetence. You know, NDAs are only good if you have the money to sue. Worked with a company that didn't pay me, so I told them their NDA didn't apply. They threatened to sue. My response: you can't even afford to pay me. You sure as hell can't afford to sue. Well, this is already public knowledge, and they forgot to have me sign an NDA anyway, but Savannah College of Art and Design's Ombudsman Sophia Bagnally, the independent person who's supposed to represent students in cases of unfair treatment by the school, married one of the school's vice presidents too, and is now Sophia Leto. It's definitely a conflict of interest, but she's still serving as independent ombudsman and currently refusing to help students get any kind of refund now that all their classes are online and they don't have access to the expensive equipment their expensive tuition is supposed to be paying for. Edit. Wow, this blew up. For anyone affected by SCAD, whether it was the abrupt closure of the Hong Kong campus, financial burden, lack of access to facilities, poor e-learning quality, etc., you do still have recourse, even if the ombudsman may be working against you. SCAD's accreditation is up for review with Saxcock this year. Saxcock will accept written complaints mailed to their office. Link below. Make sure to include documentation. Things advertised by admissions, emails, financial statements, etc. That, unfortunately, seems to be the only way to make them improve. Saxcock.org link. Edit 2. Sorry, I almost forgot. There were a large number of Chinese students who were accepted and given the standard due date for their enrollment fee of a few months, but then, after the outbreak of COVID-19, received another email from your admissions rep demanding payment of the enrollment fee within 3 days. That is not okay. Whether you paid the fee or not, please take the time to file a complaint with Saxcock and send them that material, both the acceptance documents and the later email demanding payment in 3 days. When I was fired from Auntie Anne's in 2010, I signed a 10-year non-compete/NDA contract, promising not to detail the baking secrets or work for another pretzel establishment. Well, that ended this year, so now I can run out and start a pretzel store, because the secret I was keeping was making pretzels literally requires 2 products. One of them being water and the other a large bag of pretzel meal/dust/powder. Quite literally anyone with $2,500 can start a pretzel stand and make perfectly fine pretzels. It's not difficult whatsoever. Edit. I signed the letter when I was hired, but I got a copy with my termination letter. Well, you forgot to say what the secret browning agent is that all the pretzels get dipped into before they go on the sheet and into the oven. It's baking soda and water. Mystery solved. Also lemonade too. 4. 8. Refrigerate. I think I'm finally ready to let the world know my secret. If you've ever used VeriSite, the loading spinners you see when the report loads aren't waiting for anything. People kept complaining that reports were coming back too fast, so it must not be working right. It doesn't take long to complete a few hundred Google searches simultaneously, so the loading spinner just makes you wait a few seconds longer, so it feels like more is happening. So glad to finally get that off my chest. Bonus fact: edit. I also added applying phlebotinum, reticulating splines, and looking for cat memes as random loading messages. But they wouldn't let me do harassing at TEDCRUZ on Twitter. This is a good one. Now we just need an elevator engineer to admit that the close door button doesn't actually do anything. I worked at a small bakery in New York City when I was younger. Every morning the bakery would take their day-old cupcakes and deliver them to a tour company that did Sex and the City tours. The tour company would pass our cupcakes off as cupcakes from Magnolia, and significantly much more popular bakery. I went on that tour with my ex-wife and ate one of those cupcakes. Edit. The cupcake was pretty disappointing. Definitely tasted stale. After the cupcake, the tour took us to some swanky little underground bar where they fed us cosmopolitan martinis, and then it ended at a dildo store. They set us up for a good time. The owner of the company is an absolute psycho. They have been trying to hire developers for years now, and despite paying really well, they can't keep them. I quit after 3 days. I was trying to help out on a high priority bug on my 3rd day when I said all the requests to X endpoint are failing, to which he replied, I see 1 out of 500 requests succeeding. Does that sound like all to you? He then called a company-wide all-hands meeting and proceeded to tell everyone how important it is that we all speak carefully and that we don't need fucking retards like me lying. to the company making it harder to diagnose issues. I told him to go fuck himself and quit on the spot. Turns out the company has a big history of this. My boss, who had been there for 2 weeks, had tried to quit the week prior, but was convinced to stay on to meet me. He left a few days after me. Apparently a few people got together and tried to tell the owner that he needs to watch how he talks to people, and he blew up on them about it too. I later heard that I was something like the 10th person to quit within their first month in a row. The sad truth is that the dude actually seems pretty smart, but has been acting like a megalomaniac while he pisses his money away and abuses his employees that are for whatever reason unwilling to leave. This is juicy. I like this one. Star Wars Battlefront 2 EA will have microtransactions. The NDA was signed in 2016. I was getting more and more worried as the release date kept getting closer, and then it happened. The backlash was so strong that EA went down in the history books as most downvoted comment in Reddit's history. I worked at a gym, and in the showers there was yellow shampoo and blue body wash and pump dispensers. I found out that the only difference between the two soaps was the color. Edit. Memory joggers, it was 25 plus years ago. Hand soap was blue, body wash was green, shampoo was yellow. All the same. Edit 2. As funny as the replies are, it wasn't an NDA about soap. It was just a generic employment NDA to protect the privacy of members and business affairs of the gym. I had a similar thing. Not NDA bound, but everyone in our office building thought the soap was bronze. Until I saw a cleaner filling the dispensers with white soap. Turns out the stainless steel dispensers were rusting from the inside out, so the soap was full of rust. Eater. Link to video of cleaning the dispenser. i.com link. In the IT world, it is often that the piece of internal software or system that gives your company an edge is not quite as huge a deal as it seems. Often it is not much more than a couple of technologies mashed together to automate things in a way nobody else is doing yet, and those things are fiercely guarded. I had cases where people saw stuff in action and tried to replicate it, but could not because they were missing just one small piece. A couple of technologies mashed together to automate things. You've just described the whole software engineering, and it's not a bad thing, actually. I'd rather not risk it, but let's just say hypothetically that a certain tech company who is, inside, keeps its campuses pretty simple. I'm talking old, rundown buildings that need dozens of buckets everywhere to catch water every time it rains. They bully companies in the local economy to put up with their horse shot, cause they know they are too big to hear a no. Hypothetically, edit, I feel like I'm about to get a very angry and legal jargon filled phone call. Also, I'm leaving horse shot cause I think it's funny. Come on, give us some more intel. Never had an NDA on this, but if I give too much info, I'll get tagged and likely get in serious trouble. BCBS had a severe security breach back in 2007. If you were with them in a certain area of the country and ever called them the number for help on your account, all of your personal info was caught by a third party. Every caller, every piece of data. They never disclosed this breach. Edit. Clarification. I once had to sign an NDA to get a price on a printer for my sign shop. This was a printer that was only sold by one distributor, by the way, so there wasn't even any direct competition on this particular model. I think their gimmick was that if they make a really big deal out of giving you this super secret pricing, that you'd be lulled into thinking it was really something special. Edit. Interesting comment by u/beard-man below, who probably has the right idea as to what was going on with this practice. They weren't worried about you going to a different supplier. They wanted to be able to offer different prices to different customers. This is a concept called price discrimination and is a very common practice. Their machine doesn't do what they want it to because they designed it and they are not engineers. Also, all investments into their company is investment into a long-term project that they are making out will take way less time than it will. Edit. I'm afraid I never worked for Theranos or Tesla. I actually can't name the company, but it hires 2 people currently. Everyone who has worked in a startup or R&D company can probably identify with this. And #X200B. Last company I worked for have great marketing and are selling a product that looks amazing. Like it could actually change the face of redacted, which would literally affect everything we buy, and hashtag X200B, but it doesn't work. It's never really worked. I worked there for 2 years, and it didn't work the whole time. Now I've worked somewhere else for 2 years, but I still talk to the guys there and it still doesn't work. And hashtag X200B, they spent millions on a production line to make it, but it doesn't work. The production line barely works. They have contracts with huge companies, they have government sectors interested, and they are telling them all that they are so close, and the investors keep pouring in money, but it doesn't FNG work. And hashtag X200B, edit, it's unlikely you would have heard of this company or product, unless you are work in a very specific industry, but it would be used by pretty much every single person in the modern world. Likely without you even noticing. I walked dogs. I'll repeat this. I was a dog walker, and I have signed 3 NDAs. It's amazing what people want to protect. It just means he has wealthy clients who don't want photos of their house and pets leaked to the paparazzi. The book you're reading might only be a bestseller because the author had enough money to buy thousands and thousands of copies, have them shipped to a warehouse for storage, and eventually destroyed. My best friend worked at a roadside attraction near Chattanooga, Tennessee, called Ruby Falls. There's something else called Ruby Falls elsewhere in the country. It's supposedly a waterfall inside a cave. Of course, the trail to the cave is redone with all sorts of rock brought in from around the world. I think they've owned up to that part now. But the waterfall itself is barely a trickle naturally, and then only in the wetter season. They've run a pipe up there to supplement the falls, hidden by cracks and crevices and cemented over, and powered by a pump off to the side, which you can't hear when the water is splashing down from 100 feet overhead. It's 99% from the city of Chattanooga or maybe Lookout Mountain Municipal Water Supply. Of course, with such a wet area, old electrical wires going back to the Great Depression, and 300 feet underground, it sputters, or shorts out, and stops every now and then. The first rule in the falls room is make everybody leave immediately if the power goes out, not for safety, but because the fable agreed upon will be shown as fake. The lead effects, when you first walk into the cavern, are a bit much. I live just up the road, and it is the least recommended tourist attraction. When I have guests, go to the aquarium. Well, Facebook moderators could disclose the trauma they've experienced moderating one of the biggest social media platforms in the world. They've witnessed horrific things that you would only ever think could happen in a war. One anecdote was of a woman who saw a man stabbed dozens of times, begging for his life. Usually, they don't last long, but the things they see on the job stick with them for years after they quit. And, unlike actual Facebook employees, they don't get paid very well, or receive much at all in terms of compensation. Cognizant, the company that manages Facebook's moderation, offers them counseling while they work there, but the second they quit, they no longer have access to it and must either deal with the consequences on their own or get the money for a therapist. This shit's fucked up, and the icing on the cake is the NDA, which means that they would take huge personal risk in warning anybody else about the job. New people signing up think they are getting a cushy job, albeit with relatively low pay, then get slammed in the face with things that no one should have to see, much less interact with as their job. I used to work in fine dining in Oklahoma City. Cocaine everywhere. I've personally walked in on several NBA players over the years, face down in that white girl. Come to mention it, I've seen several of them fucking other guests on the same bathroom counter that their teammates just did a line off of. Personally got to watch Harold Ham sign his divorce check. $975 million is a whole lot of zeros in a small space. Wild times indeed. Edit, for those that may want more stories. I did get to see LeBron covered in toilet paper. Hilarity ensued. Needless to say, she was escorted out. Their groundbreaking idea was the same one everyone else had 10 years before. Edit, because so many people seem to think so. No, this had nothing to do with Apple. This was some no-name startup that never went anywhere obviously, and wanted to contract our no-name startup that never went anywhere for its services. It was also vague that I don't really remember the details. I mean, I can tell you where we met, I can tell you how hot it was that day, I can tell you what I was wearing, but their big idea? Nothing. We reused buffet-style food served in a cafeteria that we are supposed to compost and record as waste. The health inspector says anything that's left open buffet style and serve yourself can't be taken back and repurposed because it's not monitored and could be cross-contaminated or many other things. Nobody should ever eat buffet style if avoidable, FYI. But the Fortune 500 company I worked for was unhappy about the money they were losing by composting the food, so they make us keep it and reserve it later. Or repurpose it into soup or casserole or something. Personally, I never did this and just waited for my boss to leave and compost the food, but others I worked with were too worried about losing their jobs to go against orders. I didn't want to be fired, but felt morally obligated to not feed people food that was meant to be garbage. So I just sneaky tossed it out when nobody was looking because I got paid really well there. We all had to sign NDAs saying we wouldn't tell the media or non-employees about recipes and procedures that covered leftover food and food waste. Eventually my boss discovered what I was doing, and I stood up to him about not being willing to reuse garbage as food. So we agreed that I'd just quit, because while they could force me not to talk about it, they couldn't actually force me to do something illegal for my job, and I was clearly refusing to do it. You should have just reported them to the health inspector. A non-disclosure agreement can't be used to hide illegal activity, and if it went to court it would be deemed unenforceable. Sure, they can prevent you from disclosing recipes/procedures, but that can't prevent you from reporting violations to the proper authorities. It's not an NDA, it's a secrecy agreement with Dodd that elapsed after 25 years. I worked as a programmer for the US Air Force on the global USAF budget in 1979 through early 1981. There was a period of time after Reagan became a leading candidate, but before he won the election or took office. Jimmy Carter was a lame duck president, and many senior officers really hated him. During this time, the USAF had flown the B-1. Not the B-1A, not the B-1B, this was when it was just the B-1. People had spent a significant portion of their careers working on delivering the B-1 program. They really believed in the B-1 as a strategic long-range supersonic bomber. Jimmy Carter hated the B-1. He viewed it as a wasteful, unnecessary, bloated program designed to keep the builders afloat at the expense of the taxpayer. He had cancelled the project in something like 77. But a couple flying examples were available, but never to see service. Reagan loved the B-1. It was everything he loved about our military programs. Fast, sexy, high-tech, and better than anything the Soviets had. All of that being said, here's what happened. Jimmy Carter gave explicit orders that the only two, not certain, B-1s currently flying be broken up into parts, the program completely cancelled, the engineering materials be archived at the Pentagon, and all funding ended. He wanted direct evidence sent to him that this had happened, in the form of pictures of the broken up aircraft. Ronald Reagan was informed of this order by sources in our organization. Reagan let it be known that Carter's order was absolutely not to be followed under any circumstances. Now, where do I come in? I was just this guy working on the AF budget. It was a top secret clearance, mainly because any analyst could correlate money to named projects, both globally and on bases. So one day I'm going over daily reports and I see this massive new expenditure for I think, right Patterson. It's not in the approved project list. It's not in the unapproved project list. So clearly, it has not gone up to Congress. Yet, the money is actually in the dispersal. So I go to my boss, and I point it out. It doesn't belong there, so obviously it's a mistake. He agrees, and we reverse it. A couple of days later, all hell breaks loose when a general officer I had never seen before comes rampaging through the office demanding to know who shorted his funding. Now, at this point we get hauled into a room, sword to secrecy, and told to fund this maintenance project. What was the project? Pay a huge team of contractors to very carefully disassemble one of the B-1s, drag in parts from other aircraft, show it being crushed, and send pics to Carter. Meanwhile, reassemble the plane and hide both of them inside black hangars, and that was why Reagan was able to have the program restarted literally within days of taking office. The program was fully back online in 1981. The higher-ups in a company I worked for several years ago had a non-verbal agreement among managers to not hire black people. It was in an area with very low African American population, but the fact that the VP slipped that to me on a night out with coworkers was surprising. Portal 3 was in development at some point. Got a tour of Valve in 2013 and got to see a very early stage of the game. Pretty sure it's not coming out anymore. Probably got scrapped a couple times. Maybe it's Portal VR now. The $100 million electronic component broker that I worked for shafted me out of $900K in commissions when I was in my early 20s. They assumed I would not have enough money to fight them in court and they took their shot. I got a lawyer on contingency, sued them, and took home a $500K settlement in 2000. The 20 years NDA recently expired, and they can continue to kiss my ass until their graves. I disclosed to a minority partner that the majority partner owed him $100K. He could have easily received a check for that amount, but he sued for $700K, spent $300K on a lawyer and got nothing. I saw the owner of a company I worked for do the same thing. A sales employee sued for not getting proper commissions and the CEO easily paid 10 times that amount fighting it in court, only to lose and have to pay anyways. Spite. Edit. Worked for. I was in the military from 07 to 09. The unit I landed in had the second highest suicide rate and the lowest re-enlistment rate out of any unit in the entire military. 0.3 people jumped from the third deck of the barracks, and I got a table thrown at me the day I got to the unit. On a training exercise I got kept awake by a rotating shift of people for 5 days straight. Our NCOs poured salt water down the barrels of our cannons, so we would have something to do. I had to walk around a convoy of vehicles for 4 hours, while everyone else got to sleep, because I missed a platoon meeting that I didn't even know existed. I got pulled off a firing range, so I wasn't there for the briefing. I stood 2 separate firewatch shifts in one night, because I didn't have my gear 15 minutes before a platoon formation. It was in the back of my Humvee that admin took to go get us chow. I wasn't present when they said to get you gear out. Last I had been told was to leave it there. The corporal basically threw me under the bus. The shit of that one is, if I'd kept my mouth shut and not gone to him with a problem I'd have been fine as the Humvee with my gear and it got back in time. 3 NCOs came into my room to harass me for having some discoloring on my camis and it almost turned violent, especially when I told them I didn't have the money to replace them. Punched an oak bookshelf instead. Broken pinky. A corporal told a PFC to go get the MRE heaters out of a trash bag. PFC basically said HAA, lol, I'm eating and didn't do it. Corporal then told me to do it while I had a spoonful of food in my mouth. I paused, looked at him, and he then tackled me to the ground and grabbed me by the neck and was choking me. At this point I pulled out my knife to gut that prick. Our gunnery sergeant pulled him off me just in time. It eventually got to where I didn't trust anyone in my unit and they had to separate me. They gave me an honorable discharge in exchange for keeping my mouth shut for 10 years about everything that went on. Edit 1. Forgot to mention the time when they had us fill out pre-deployment screening questions and 70% of the unit said they would kill themselves or not stop a platinumate from getting killed if they had the ability to. Our staff NCOs were told to rip them all up and stood over us while we filled out new ones to make sure we didn't tell the truth. This would have made the unit be non-deployable and the funding would have been cut. Edit 2. In the course of this post it has been pointed out that the NDA wasn't a real one and that some officer was playing one last min game with me on my way out. Me as a naive 19 years old kid who didn't know any better bought that hook, line and sucker. Edit 3. Minor clarity details. TL. Doctor. Got an honorable discharge and what I now know to be fake 10-year NDA in exchange for keeping my mouth shut about the shady practices happening in my unit. My mom had to sign her NDA about Ricky Martin being gay. I'm still bound, but insider trading is real and executive often step down or retire early for getting caught. The company I worked for had shockingly bad maintenance. Everything was broken. We had floods daily because the hose leaked. I told you not to tell anyone, Marcus. That married grocery store manager in his late 40s was, indeed, having sex with that 17-year-old courtesy clerk in the compressor room. This was 15 plus years ago when I was a person in charge and not yet a full assistant store manager. Our store in the back room had a couple of rooms upstairs, a large room that housed all of our electrical breakers and backup generators, and a room that housed all of our compressors that kept our freezers and coolers running. Both were locked at all times for security reasons. They were accessible only through the back room. The 17-year-old courtesy clerk bagger had worked there for a while. She was not the best worker. She had a habit of disappearing for a half hour or hour at a time. I and the other picks complained and tried discipline, but the store manager blocked it. So we just dealt with it. Yes, she was an attractive blonde. I was in charge one night and we got an alarm that one of the compressors was low. It was my job to check the level, record the compressor number, and turn it in. When I went up to the room, the door was propped open with a bucket. I assumed whoever worked in the room last left it open. If you have never been in a compressor room before, I have to tell you that it is loud. Our store had several diesel engines that powered the compressors. I proceed into the back of the room, come around a corner to see the girl, not quite naked, but not fully clothed, being serviced by our store manager who had left for the day hours ago. Neither saw me, and I hightailed it out of there. I wrestled with what to do. I was worried about my career at the time, so I called the security hotline and made an anonymous call and told them in vague terms what happened and that they should contact me about details. I'm 100% certain that they knew it was me that called. A couple of days later, the store manager is suspended and I'm interviewed, the assistant store manager is interviewed, and the picks. They tell us not to discuss it, so of course we did. I was a little late to the party. Almost everyone knew. The store manager would use his store keys to come into the back room, meet the courtesy clerk, and then would hook up in the compressor room. She was not the first teenager he had done this with at this store and others. They fire the store manager, and like an idiot, he sues. Dozens of people are deposed, NDAs are drawn up and signed. He thinks better of it, drops the suit, and that's the last I ever heard of him. The girl quit right after the store manager was suspended. Seeing this question so high up, expected it to have better answers. Edit. This comment was made when the post only had 7 comments, most of them trolls or stupid answers. My dad worked for the Soviet government in the early 1980s and was banned from leaving the country till 1995 for security reasons, which suggests the program was likely still ongoing in Russia after the fall of the USSR. I asked him once about what he worked on. He said, nothing important. I didn't press it, but I'm still curious lol. Back when EpiPen selling for $400 was big in the news, I was part of an engineering student team working on a better and cheaper device. It would have 2 doses in 1 pen. Since a lot of people are advised to carry 2 pens, you would administer 1 shot, and then if needed, twist the pen, and then administer the second. The epinephrine cartridge was replaceable too, so if you didn't use the pen for a year or 2 and it expired, you just got the cheap epinephrine cartridge. Epinephrine is cheap and replaced it. I ended up leaving the team because no one was contributing to the project except me. I had to sign an NDA to be cast in a pretty big movie this year with a bunch of Marvel people. I know literally nothing of any value to everyone. All I did was dress up and stand out in the snow, staying perfectly still and freezing my ass off next to Tom Holland for a week. Spider-Man 3, Winter Spider confirmed. Windows XP Tablet Edition isn't going to be that great. Also, the original announcer voice in Fusion Frenzy was even more annoying than the final version. I was wrongfully terminated by a past employer. They lowballed the settlement offer and withheld payment on my accrued vacation. This part was actually illegal. It took about a year to get to the point where their attorneys realized that we were not lying about them holding back the accrued vacation, and this caused them to make a more than generous offer to make my claim against them go away. How seriously amazing Anthem felt, played, looked, and performed in the pre-alpha for closed test. My god, how the greats have fallen. Most major insurance companies can afford to cover most lower class clients 100% 30x over and still have more money at the end of the day. But if they did that, how would their board of directors get massive holiday bonus checks? Insurance companies will take any opening they can to avoid paying a possible claim, including going outside of the law, if they feel it is financially advantageous for them to do so. They spend tens of millions of dollars a year training people how to do this. If you have a claim, always escalate. Be a pain in the ass. Threaten litigation if necessary. I was once an IT contractor for a now defunct bureau within the Department of the Interior during the event Deepwater Horizon disaster. Since the department has its hands in offshore drilling, they were part of the response team and boots on the ground. Anyway, it's a little known fact that all the extra stress plus aging IT equipment during the first 48 hours after the blowout took their entire authentication and email infrastructure down Active Directory and Exchange for 2 days. There were also other weird glitches from offices around the US not related to the outage. A switch going out here, building automation there. It was a fucking disaster. This was, of course, after years of emails and documentation stating they were heading that way. I was directly involved with recovering that infrastructure and the aftermath of dissolving the bureau, which really wasn't anything special. They just became 3 different bureaus, got new email addresses, and continued on in their role under a new title. Edit, words and detail. Found out my company had been manually adjusting my time punches to avoid paying me overtime. In order to get the pay, I had to sign an NDA saying I wouldn't tell anyone about it and just take it on their word that they'd stop doing it to everyone else. I no longer work here. However, my female boss, also owner of the company, had an affair that ended up in a divorce. The guy she had an affair, who lived a state away 10+ hour drive with, basically told her to GTFO and that he wasn't leaving his family for her. It didn't stop her purchasing a property in the same suburb as the guy she cheated on her husband with in the name of the business, supposedly to do positive things for the business, yet make the decision to move into said property not even a month after settlement. I worked as a nanny for a senator. He and his wife slept in separate beds, and he had a girlfriend. My last company, a medium-sized airline, paid their CEO a $10 million bonus after he bankrupted the company. Not me, but my cousin. He was working his first job in marketing in one of the top marketing firms in the country. My cousin is ridiculously good looking, used to be a model for R&F, not just the local store models, but one of the national models, and dresses well. So he get to the job and his boss's boss male starts hitting on him ridiculously. He's invited to lunch, dinner, asked if he wants to go to the boss's weekend home, all the time turning him down. One time in the car, his boss told him how quickly he would advance if he spent the weekend with him, and my cousin recorded the entire conversation. He nopes the boss and then ghosts him on invites for weeks until the boss stops asking. Fast forward to 3 months after he's hired, and he's doing his review with ours and his immediate supervisor is there. He starts to hear about how he's not a good fit, not a team player, etc. They let him know they were terminating him, and he grabbed the paperwork they wanted him to sign and put it in his pocket. Then he pulled out his phone and played his boss's recording. After he was done, he looked at the HR manager and asked if she had anything to say. They both left the room acting shell-shocked, and he stayed there in the conf room until the HR manager came back an hour later. She put her boss on the conference line and they started telling him it was illegal to record private conversations. They would file charges, etc. He laughed and told them he would go to the press and that he knows they would love to put him on TV. 3 days later, he is signing a non-disclosure and picking up a check almost big enough to pay for his 3 years of law school. For anyone wondering, no, the guy who harassed him was not fired, and he has since been promoted again by the company. I used to work for a major NASCAR team. Bunch of racists and cheaters. Oh well, I guess that wasn't much of a secret. Technically, I'm still bound by the NDA, but the company didn't know how to write NDAs. It's like they had the following conversation. Legal, hey, we need an NDA just like all these other companies have. Publisher, do you know how to write an NDA? Legal, no, the NDA was for a role-playing game that I signed up to play test with the group. The NDA itself actually forbade me, the person running the game and providing feedback to the company, from talking about it, but had no such restrictions in place for anyone I ran the game for. It only required me to sign it, not any of my players. The way it was written, I was not allowed to play the game with any of the players in the group. How they expected anyone to playtest the game, I don't know. The way that RPG playtests are supposed to happen is, point 1 the company releases a playtest document, point 2 people play it, and then 3 they make changes for another round of playtesting. What actually happened is the company changed the core resolution mechanic of the game in the middle of the first round of testing, in the middle of a long message forum thread, based on the feedback of people who were openly admitting they only read the rules and hadn't actually played the game. One of the people who stated they hadn't played the game also said he didn't have a group of players they were going to play it with, so they changed the game based on nothing but feedback from people who hadn't tested anything. To top it off, after my group actually played the game and submitted feedback, we weren't invited back to the second round of playtesting. Also, we were left off the playtest credits. Don't buy the marketing packages at self-publishers. They're scams. Get the basic package or just do it through Amazon. Sell copies and ebooks. Then take those numbers to a real publisher or an agent to demonstrate your sales. Let them work for you. That health tracking app you use wasn't made for you. It was made to collect your data, to be sold to Big Pharma, so they could better understand what drugs they should push onto you and people like you. To some this is obvious, but the amount of people who surprised when I tell them this is shocking. NGL, I think Antivax has ruined the phrase Big Pharma for me. Just immediately roll my eyes when I see it now. Star Wars Galaxy's beta was pretty fun. The music industry invested in private prisons and pushed hip-hop that glamorized criminal activity to keep the occupancy quota. Back in the 90s, still going. University I used to teach at did not care what prospective students got for entry into the university. In multiple meetings I attended, they treated students as headcounts towards better course statistics, and if a single student was underperforming in a single semester, instead of removing them, they would give them just above the threshold to stay on. This happens across a lot of universities. Final grading decisions were not down to me, but course directors and head lecturers. I had raised it multiple times to an anonymous hotline at the university, but nothing was ever done. People wouldn't believe how old-fashioned its systems are behind big online shops, etc. Like anyone with decent IT skills would be able to crack them. Some of them are 30 years old command liners that are only in place because everything got built around them and have never been replaced. Follow Noel Kassler on Twitter. He worked for Mark Brunette on The Apprentice and is breaking his NDA, spilling the beans on all the crazy stuff Trump and his family did while filming the show. Byte Force is the winner of the 2019 season of BattleBits. I'll be honest, most of these were way more boring than I had anticipated. I used to be a helicopter pilot for a tour company in Las Vegas. Many of our guests come in nervous for their flight tour, even though commercial flight is leaps and bounds safer than driving. But it's okay, I get it. Helicopters are crazy, and they always explode in the movies. But what is really scary is how our managers value profits over flight safety. If the helicopter isn't flying, they aren't making money. For example, there was once a huge, and I mean massive, thunderstorm on my flight path. It doesn't take a genius to realize aircraft and thunderstorms don't mix. I told my manager I wasn't doing the flight that day. My manager asked me, "You mean you won't even try to fly through the storm?" I said nope, finished up my paperwork, and went home. The cosmetics company I worked for sold shampoo for dry hair, tangled hair, greasy hair, curly hair, fine hair, straightened hair and colored hair. It also sold dog shampoo for puppies and another for adult dogs. It was all the same shampoo, bottled differently and with a couple drops of different perfumes mixed in. The winners of the last 2 seasons of American Ninja Warrior. Monsanto knowingly killed 900 orphans in India with pesticides just to see if the health effects would be deniable and slow enough for plausible deniability. They paid the orphanage owner $600/child to shut up about it. They intentionally put it into the children's food like we test mice as an additive, and watched them die over 1.5 years. Residue of the pesticide gets on the food, and in the food. They were about to roll it out worldwide, but they accidentally found a chemical that was less toxic, Roundup. What they were about to release was 10 times more toxic than Roundup. The secret ingredient in the chocolate milkshake at Fraser's Cafe was coffee and chicory essence. Ha. Take that, you nasty owners. 20 years I've been waiting to tell the world. I feel so liberated. Soylent Green is made out of people. It's made out of people. I was asked to sign an NDA to be able to see the magical device they had that was going to change the game for its services. It was a Rapu board / case that had the company's logo stamped on it, and it ran cents. Aka, do-it-yourself router. This magical technology was and is still available for about $150 a unit. I got quite a strange look when I had to explain that their NDA would mean jack shit as the item was widely available and known. Side note, they are pretty awesome. For anyone wanting to use sense-based gateways / routers, it's a lot nicer than an old PC taking up a bunch of space. Mario Kart Tour is alright, I guess. Edit. There was a closed beta NDA for that game. www.gomesrida.com link. We couldn't just give the electric wheelchair to anyone. They had to look like they needed it. I used to work for Conagra Foods, specifically the Hebrew National Hot Dog Plant. It's honestly all amazing. The rabbis are nice and the hot dog making process is not as gross as everyone thinks. When the meat is all beef, there is probably a small amount of cleaning solvent in every hot dog you eat though. They spray that shit everywhere. Bill Murray once polished my shoes with his sock and then gave me a chocolate in his hotel room. Guillermo del Toro drank cases of Diet Coke every day that he stayed. Monica Lewinsky is really good friends with Sarah Silverman and they both hung out with John Hamm, chatting it up like old buds. Danny DeVito is a thirsty little man, and Sean Penn isn't above trying to sneak out so no one will notice his walk of shame. There's so many more, but it would take up way too much space in this comment. Also, the maitre d' was a complete tyrant who was regularly paid $1,200 under the table by guests who wanted specific tables. The club was run by the most pretentious and racist dickweed of a man. Seriously, he allowed racial slurs to be used by patrons. I'm half Asian, and heard chink being used. I was asked where my homeland was. My Latina coworker was asked if we served chimichangas. Our kitchen only served overpriced, fine dining Mediterranean food, and the owner ever so subtly fired a good bunch of our non-white staff while promoting the incompetent white male ones. The chef stated that he would never allow staff to eat the food he made, even excess food at the end of the day that would have gone in the trash. We were throwing out a $2,000 lunch buffet every day. The place was only a few months old and had the highest turnover rate of staff that I've ever experienced. 7 out of 20 or so staff members quit in 1 week. I was literally going 2 hours on a weekly basis. One time I went after a manager assumed a guest was from the Middle East because he looked disheveled and had a long beard. They also were notorious for firing staff for completely made up reasons, as in they once told one of the best members on staff that she was fired due to 1 or 2 late clock-ins. In reality, it was because of an interaction between her and a coked up member who lied in a letter to the owner. Even though I looked over security footage and saw that nothing he had stated was true. Oh, and they made all the female staff wear these matronly maid uniforms, while the male staff wore suits for the exact same position. And none of the managers ever took fault or assumed responsibility for anything that went wrong. Anyways, I got out of that toxic work environment. I was witnessing too many breakdowns on a weekly basis, and the owner made it very clear that being white and rich or famous were the most important things. One of the managers was from one of the richest families in the US. Screw treating people like humans. Screw caring about your own staff. Luckily ours wound up helping me land a job that paid 3 times as much as I was earning because they knew my complaints were valid. And I'm currently working at the best, most supportive place I could have imagined, especially in times like these. Seriously, my current boss emails make me shed tears because of how much he genuinely cares about everyone. That's why there are never any new job openings, because no one ever leaves. Complete night and day difference. 700 plus comments, and the best we can do is a cake using not homemade ingredient. The access code to enter service mode on Crown lift trucks forklifts is the last 4 digits of its corporate number. This allows you to change all the performance features in the electric motor controllers. I used to work as a programmer for Bloomberg. During the time Mike was mayor, he would often have Bloomberg staff work on programming efforts for the city in order to have control over them. I worked on several DOE applications so that Bloomberg didn't have to negotiate contracts with teachers. I also worked on his mayoral elections many times. And #X200B, all the harassment claims are true. Bloomberg was a frat boy, and so were his lieutenants. My old Christian school made my parents sign an NDA about their worship practice. I spent more time memorizing Jesus than math. When I transferred to public school in 4th grade, I was absolutely astounded at the concept of multiplication. I thought it was something I came up with. They never taught multiplication or division. They also taught that girls needed to be subservient to boys and let them do whatever they wanted, which resulted in a power dynamic issue and a lot of bullying. No parent could sue the school for child endangerment because of the NDA. I once worked for a company that tracked how much Hollywood movies earned at the box office. We had so much data that the studios got concerned and demanded we all signed NDAs. The NDAs were sent to every team. They were sent on the precise day I was transferring teams. I, as far as I know, was the only employee who was not required to sign an NDA. Best tidbit? Lilo and Stitch opened the same weekend as Minority Report, but it was Minority Report which grossed the most money for the weekend. This was a lie. Minority Report actually earned slightly less, but 20th Century Fox couldn't have a Tom Cruise feature film being out-earned by a cartoon, so a deal was struck with Disney to allow Minority Report to be reported as having a higher gross. We never found out what was offered in exchange. Update: it should be noted that Spielberg directed Minority Report and had just come off a poor box office for AI, so coming in second could have seriously hurt his career. One of my parents signed a NDA in the 70s that they are still not released from. All I know is that they worked in environmental law. They were outsourced by the government to help analyze a little problem they seemed to be having. Essentially, the government was adding something into drinking water for whatever benefit, like how they add fluoride for your teeth. Turns out this resulted in hundreds of babies dying when it was used in milk formula. Needless to say, it was removed from the water system and swiftly swept under the rug. Everyone with knowledge signed an NDA with the government with prison time if broken. I once slept with Danny Trejo. Did a gig at Windsor Castle for Princess Zara's 21st birthday. Jazz trio, cocktail hour. Prince Andrew was the only noticeable royal I saw. I guess he likes kids' birthday parties. Anyway, I've done hundreds of gigs over the years and been fed some pretty questionable meals, and I have to say I was disappointed and honored to be served microwave lasagna in the Royal Armoury on that occasion. I worked for a consumer packaged goods company that was working on a promo with a certain Marvel sequel. I was privy to the plot of said movie a good 8 months before it came out. I was anxiously waiting in the theater for the collective gasp when Vision lifted Mjolnir. That was a new sock. It was never washed in Tide. Ex-prop guy on TV commercials. Within the past decade, I single-handedly had the ability to take down Twitter and a number of huge websites and keep them down for hours, maybe days. Doing so, I would have been fired and sued into permanent poverty, but I had the system ability to do it. They fixed that problem before I left. UPMC, largest employer in Pennsylvania, is basically a pyramid scheme of accountants. Get a grant, assign 5 more accountants, hide the fact that the organization is raking in the money and increasing in size every year as a tax-exempt charity. The unique video recording software that is the backbone of the largest dance video company in the world is really just something that anyone could throw together and see with basic programming knowledge. It's just a program that starts and stops recording multiple inputs at the same time whenever you press a button and saves a text file for organizing. This will get buried, but here is a dirty little secret. Stores like Ross, TJ Maxx, Mars Halls etc. don't actually sell overstock and cancelled orders. Most of the merchandise is private label with a made up MSRP. The name brand stuff you do find is typically made exclusively for them, and it's lower quality. Those Michael Kors handbags are lower end materials and do not carry a warranty like ones bought in full line stores. Those stores focus on the hunt with made up MSRPs to trick the customer. Now they do buy cancelled orders still, but those represent a small fraction. Think about how many thousands of off-price retail stores exist. There's not that many overstocks and cancelled orders. Supply chain wise this method would fail. Source off-price operations manager for 5 years. I had to sign an NDA to work at my Chrysler dealership. Apparently they are worried I might go to Ford and talk about our engines or something. Chevy didn't ask me to do this. When I was in my first grad program in New York, I got really excited about a certain line of research because of a class I took there. The professor was enthusiastic, and I liked him. I wanted to join his lab, but there was some sexual tension between us, so we both knew it was a bad idea. When I say sexual tension I mean, for instance, we met a few times a week to discuss research and he would tell me he thought I was attractive, which at the time, when I was 21, felt really good for me to hear from this intelligent, successful, and equally attractive person. Still, I needed him to help me find a lab to join, or stick up for me with the department to help me get into another lab. My advisor was possessive and didn't want to let me switch labs. He didn't want to help me because he didn't want to have to deal with my pie's resentment in the department. One night I went to a bar near campus for a drink with a friend. I noticed that professor sitting nearby me at the bar, but we both pretended not to see each other. The next day he filed a Title IX complaint stating that he felt I was obsessed with him and told the administration that he thought I had stalked him at a bar. My pie had asked him for help filing a complaint about me to push me out of the program. My pie reported that I showed signs of mania or mental illness, citing that I'd hired 20 TAS for an experiment that only required 3, when in reality, that had been a simple misunderstanding. Her postdoc and I were running an experiment, and I was told to hire as many TAS as we can get, so I hired 20. Apparently the pie only wanted 5 or so. My pie, the postdoc, and I had all met to fix the problem, and it wasn't a big issue. I wasn't allowed to talk about any of this at the time, and I ultimately ended up mastering out of that PhD program because of all of it. The code we used to build Warhammer Online was shit recycled code from Dark Age of Camelot. I worked in the home Miawanas insurance industry as a consultant. I have a lot of details about the industry I could share. My claim to fame in that role was walking into a meeting with the VP of claims and saying I can write you one sentence and make you $34 million this year, and I did. Never buy a new phone/contract in store, do it online. You will be made to think that you're getting a good deal, but you're getting ripped off via sale techniques, and you'll genuinely believe that you're getting a good deal. I mean, as a 17-year-old babysitter, being handed an NDA was a bit shocking, but I soon learned. They were kinky as fuck. Don't leave us in the dark now. As a content mod, a lot of people have a huge problem with trauma from what they see sometimes. The higher-ups tried to cut mental health services and checkups down to one 15-minute session every 3 months. The brand new luxury apartment building I was renting a studio out of for $2,500 a month was built with substandard materials by unlicensed contractors. After we got all of our rent back as a settlement, we had to sign a non-disclosure and the rent went up for the new wave of tenants. I worked for an RFID company that created smart rocks for the US military. I handled the documentation of the process document of the parts lists, what the step-by-step process was for the assembly, testing documentation and such, and had access to part of the assembly process. NDA expired in 2018, and #X200B. Long story made short, they gave our company a bunch of rocks from a certain region in the world. One team caught the rocks. Another team inserted very basic tremble/seismic sensors, GPS system, and an active RFID transponder into a number of rocks. Another team sealed the rocks up using the top and bottom of the core and some color matched grout. Bigger rocks had long-ranged RFID readers inserted in them with GPS, and that was connected to a long-range military transmitter. Battery life was 4 to 5 years more or less. The premise was the big rock was dropped somewhere and all the little rocks were dropped randomly in a large circumference around the big rock. If a vehicle drove nearby or even a person on foot were to walk by, the little rocks would send notice to the big rock on how strong the vibrations were, and the system would send this back to a receiver many miles away, which could triangulate the source of the vibration. This was in 2004 to 2006, so you take a guess of where those rocks were from. Not necessarily something I signed an NDA for, but this is still interesting. My mom and I sat next to one of the higher ups for the Coca-Cola company on a flight. We asked him what his favorite company drink was, and he laughed and said, "I don't drink any of them." Have you seen what's actually in those drinks? The secret formula to the Krabby Patty is step 1 bun step. I used to work at a company that made small frozen mini pizzas. You know the kind. They came in packs of 4. Each layer of 2 was joined together. About 5.75 across. Fuck it. It was McCain. They had crust, sauce, 5 slices of pepperoni, and shredded cheese. After being cooked, there was some melted cheese. There were also some shredded cheese bits that didn't melt. They browned underscore. The reason for that is simple. Mozzarella cheese is expensive. Shredded frozen dough is dirt cheap. The shredded cheese was about 65% cheese and about 35% shredded dough. They didn't have to list it on the ingredients cause the dough for the crust was the exact same. Harley Davidson is gonna made an all-electric motorcycle. I knew circa 2015, wasn't announced publicly until 2018, and not released to the public until this year. I've gotten to ride them, and they are very cool. Price is a little much, especially for an electric, but still a good bike. Got to work on the project to bring them to full-scale production. Was a good experience. The hotcakes at McDonald's are pre-packaged and microwaved, like the kind you can get from the supermarket. I know it doesn't seem like a big deal cause it's fast food and not a mom and pop joint, but it blew my 16-year-old mind when I worked there. Also pretty much every vegetable is dehydrated. Every morning I'd have to open a dry paper packet of onions and add lukewarm water to it and let it sit. The salads are all pre-cut and sit in freezers until someone orders them, then we add the requested items. The only fresh thing I had to actually dice was tomatoes. And the damn ice cream machine was never cleaned. McDonald's really showed me how the world operates. Call of Duty Ghosts has dogs in it. It was really hard to keep that one under wraps before it came out. Wasn't really an NDA, but I probably would have been sacked if I started being honest and telling guests what they were eating. I felt fucking awful not being able to explain this. But Turtle Bay UK likes to promote its cooked fresh quality dishes when they are all pre-prepped from food bags that were frozen for days, then microwaved for a minute before serving. I used to ask for off-menu cheese sandwiches for my once-in-a-blue moon lunch, as a cheese sandwich would be made fresh and is quite hard to get wrong. They also marketed red wine as vegan, even though to create the wine, the process involved using fish bladders that thankfully changed after a vegan guest commented on the ingredients, leading to me reiterating my stance on their retardation. Just to clarify, one of the owners changed out all the milk for coconut milk, as he wanted us to be a vegan bar, but then continued to serve whole chickens on the menu. I don't know about you, but I like my pina coladas with milk. The option of coconut would have been nice to have, but to remove milk completely, based on that singular argument, is absurd. They also market themselves as the Turtle Bay family, and I couldn't think of anything more hypocritical than that. And I still can't get the smell of bullshit from my nostrils 2 years later. I worked for a software company who were real dicks to me the entire time I worked there. They'd make goals for me and dangle carrots such as raises and promotions, and when I reached those goals they did not follow through with their commitments. I left the company in protest and was immediately approached by a company in the process of being courted by my previous employer for purchase. My previous employers were offering them a pittance. I was confidentially hired as a special consultant by the company being courted and gave them a lot of good information about how to maximize their income from a sale, and steered them away from my previous employer and helped them sell their company to my previous employer's strongest competitor. I helped this small company make a lot more money than my prior employer was offering them, and got to fuck over those dicks who took years of my work from me and lied about my pay and opportunities. In the end, being a dick to me and screwing me out of about $10k in annual salary likely cost them millions of dollars. Like and subscribe for good luck, you handsome gentleman.